hear me now. Let me just go to the Q&A page. So, are you on the new? Okay, is everyone on the new link? And can you hear me? I suppose. Just have to wait a minute for so there'll be a delay. Let me have a look. Yeah, well, I can. Ooh. That's the most ridiculously annoying thing I've ever seen. Heard that it provides you with a link that you can't actually use. Right. Well, hopefully that's hopefully it's working now. Then people need to be right. Okay, so the YouTube link is working. Right. Please go to the YouTube link. Please go to that link. Right. Tell you what, I'll post that on the Hive group as well, since that's not working very well. Hang on. So delete this. Delete. Post. Right. Good. So everyone can hear now. Good. Right. Right. So let's begin then. What is there to say? Well, first of all, I've been trying to get some exercises in that you can actually do, and I've just put them in today in the exercises beginner section. Now, they're not written by me, they're written by another guy who's working on a different PHP course. But I've had a look at them and they seem okay. So there are basically a set of exercises that pretty much bring us up to where we are on the course. So they go from HTML all the way to where we are as of last week, and indeed where we are of this week. Actually, exercise 9, we'll be doing stuff will be related to things we're doing on Wednesday and Thursday for Leeds and Osterley, respectively. I've put those in the exercises folder, in the beginner folder, inside the exercises folder, and they're available on the Dropbox link that I have posted. And I'll post that again to both groups because people might have gotten lost. So, and then on the walkthrough sections, I've added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new files, and those files represent the subject we covered last week, to do with integrating HTML and PHP, and to do with forms and post and get. And I've also added one on types, which I haven't yet finished. But for today, what I'll do is, because we haven't really had a cart exercise to do, I thought I'd go through the practice exercises, all of these, and solve them or walk through solving them. So if there are no questions, let me just double check on the questions before we begin. No questions, I'll go through. So number 1, syntax. So what I'm just going to go through these files, open them up, and then solve each of the problems. So syntax, straightforward. Question: echo the word welcome followed by a new line. So echo welcome. Now we could put a new line in here. Just put a new line here, there. So we can use 2 echo statements, or we can use single echo statement with a new line embedded in the string. So all that's \n means a new line inside quotes. Right. If there's problems with watching your screen, then it's not my problem. It's yours. You need to change the quality settings of what you're watching on YouTube and full size that. Right. So, question 2: define a variable which refers to your name. So, name Michael Burgess. Find a title which is your name concatenated to the string profile. So, title the variable, which is my name, concatenated to the string profile. So remember that concatenation means joining, and the dot is the operator you use that with, so operator for concatenation. Good. Define a variable which refers to your height in centimeters. So height in centimeters, 181. Define your age as an integer number of whole years plus some fraction of 12. So here's my age, is a whole number of years plus some fraction of 12. Well, how many months out of 12 have I gone past my age of 27? Well, 2 months, because my birthday is at the end of May. Now, the only point for this line here isn't really to demonstrate anything about mathematics. It's just to contrast a whole number with a partial number, which is basically just an integer float. So it's just to show you that there's a difference in programming between whole numbers and partial numbers. Right. Echo out all this information using new lines and tabs to make it pretty, I think that should say. Right, so let's use, I mean, we haven't used tabs in the course thus far, but we can use them here. So echo my title, followed by a new line. Let's put a colon there. And then let's echo name's age is age, new line. Let's put a tab at the front of it. Echo name's height is height centimeters. A new line into that, and the front of it. Right. So a couple of things to say here. Number one, these tab characters \T inside double quotes gets replaced with a tab, which is a little indentation. And if you'll note that I've just put this apostrophe straight after the name of this variable, that's because apostrophes are not allowed to be in the name of variables in PHP, so it doesn't really matter if one is there in the string. PHP can tell the difference between this, which is a variable, and that which is just a part of the string. Okay, so let's run this file. I'll go copy full path, run command prompt, move to that path. We'll check I'm in the right folder, and then run file number 1. Ooh, I'm dividing variable height, so I've obviously I've called it height cm. Let's just call it height for now. There we go. So we've got welcome coming from the echo statement at the top. We've got Michael Burgess's profile with a colon coming from the title, and we've got Michael Burgess's age is this, Michael Burgess's height is that. Let's just see what the any questions are. Well, great working now anyway. Thank you for the comment though. Right, good. So let's just see what we were meant to be demonstrating with this file here. So very simple things, hopefully. Strings using double quotes. an echo statement, putting a semicolon at the end of each line, variable assignment, setting some value to be equal to some variable, so putting this value inside this variable, string concatenation, joining this string to that string and creating a new string which is stored in title, whole numbers or integers, and an integer plus a number which isn't a whole number, a floating point number, which in this case is about 0.2, and then using new line characters and tab characters to make output look a little bit neater. So let's clear the screen there and run that again. Using welcome, Michael Burgess profile, age, and height. Okay, so hopefully relatively straightforward. Right, exercise 2 then. So first question, 1 or 0, this variable here, is randomly 1 or 0. If it is 1, echo blue, otherwise echo green. So if 1 or 0 is 1, echo blue, otherwise echo green. That's one way you can do this, and this is a very simple, straightforward kind of way. So recall that the double equals means is equal to. You could also write if 1 or 0, echo blue, else echo green. Why? Well, because 0 in conditional contexts or Boolean contexts, situations where you have this conditional or this test, means false. Boolean contexts. Remember that in a conditional context or a Boolean context, 0, false, null, empty string, etc., all get treated as though they mean or as though they were false, and are sometimes called falsy, and everything else gets treated as though it were true. So if I put if 1 or 0 here and it were 1, then that would be treated as true, so I'd get blue. If it was 0, that would mean false, so it would get treated as green, so it would come out here as green. Right. So both of those are reasonable. Define a variable called favorite drink with your favorite drink. So favorite drink, let's define that to be, I don't know, for wine. Create an if-else statement which tests favorite drink. For wine, then lemonade, then anything else. If it's wine, echo you're drunk. If it's lemonade, echo too acidic. Otherwise, echo try something else. So if favorite drink is wine, then echo you're drunk. Else, if it's lemonade, 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 then echo too acidic. Now in this case I'm using the double quotes so that I can put a single quote inside them more easily, but in this case there's no good reason to use it. I'm just using to keep them consistent with this. Finally, echo try something else. There we go. So we test favorite drink to see if it's wine. If it is, we echo you're drunk. We test it to see if it's lemonade. If it is, echo too acidic. Otherwise, we echo try something else. Okay, next question. Write a switch case statement that does the same job as the if, else above. So we want to switch on favorite drink, meaning we want to compare favorite drink to a variety of cases or potential values. So in the case where it's wine, we want to echo you're drunk. And then we just write break here. That's just a piece of the syntax. It's something we have to remember. for no good reason particularly, to be honest. Then case lemonade. You want to echo to acidic and break. And then the default case, or the otherwise case, or the case where nothing else matches, is called default when we're using switch statement. So that means that if lemonade hasn't matched and wine hasn't matched, then this matches. So default echo try something else. Break. Good. So that's the same as that one above. Now, in all of these cases, whether we have an if or we have a switch, we can write multiple expressions or statements in these regions here. We only have one echo statement now, but we could have several, or we could have function calls, or a variety of other things. So before I run this, I'm going to just put some new lines in to separate out the particular pieces of syntax. So what I could write here is echo new line character. But because the slides have it in, and because it's quite good practice anyway, I'm going to echo PHP EOL. Now, PHP EOL, or PHP underscore EOL, is a constant predefined by PHP just to be the new line character. It's exactly the same thing, except that on Windows, what we really should write instead of \n is \r\n. For historical reasons, PHP Windows requires 2 little symbols to mean a new line rather than 1. Mac and Linux both now require 1 symbol to mean a new line, but strictly speaking, Windows requires 2. So this little constant is defined to be rn on Windows and just \n on Mac and Linux. Now, a lot of programs on Windows don't really care, but there are some programs that do care, like, for example, Notepad tends to care. But a lot of programs like browsers and so on Windows won't really care if you just put 1 symbol there rather than 2. But strictly speaking, we should really just have \r\n. So if we use PHP EOL, which is defined correctly, regardless of whatever operating system you're on, then that'll keep us right. So I'm going to use that for now, just because it's one of the things used in the slides, and it's good practice anyway. So that's just basically a new line. So if I put that in a few different places, then it will separate out all the examples that I've written when I print everything, when I get everything print out with a new line character. So let's run that file. PHP2. Blue, you're drunk. So we might get green sometimes, because remember that's coming from a random variable there at the top. It's either 1 sometimes, and it's 0 some other times. So here we're testing to see if it's 1. If it's not, green. If it is, blue. Right? And we reuse the same variable for this example here. So whatever value this will be, this will equally be. So whatever we get out of here, we get out of here as well. Right. Good. So let's move on. 3 arrays. Create an array of your hobbies. Right. So remember, there's 2 types of array. There's sequential arrays and there's associatives. And sequential arrays are basically for groups or collections of things. An associative array or associative arrays are really for single things with many properties. So, for example, an associative array might have a name and an age and a height. That basically all describes one thing, a person. And a sequential array has just a few things in it. Michael, John, Burgess, dog, cat, with just commas, and that describes a group of something or a collection of something. So when we want to create an array of hobbies, we really want a collection or group of hobbies. So we want a sequential array. Hobbies equals photography, programming, and let's go for philosophy. Good. Now we want to echo out this information. For each element of hobbies, where hobby is a particular element. Right, so there are a couple of ways we could do this. The first way, we could just write echo hobbies 0 followed by a new line. Echo hobbies 1 followed by a new line. Echo hobbies 2 followed by a new line. That will echo out the first hobby, the second, and the third. Now that's where we sort of manually repeat the echo expression for every different hobby inside the hobbies array. But we should know, I think, at this point, that there's a special loop in PHP called the for each loop that allows you to repeat an expression or a series of expressions for every element of an array without you having to manually write out the repetition yourself. So you can write for each hobbies as hobby, echo hobby, followed by new line. So both those things mean exactly the same thing. So where we go 0, 1, 2, we write it out. We write it out manually, or we could just say for every hobby in hobbies, or for every element in hobbies called hobby, do this thing, echo hobby. Now, in general, of course, we won't know how many elements an array has, or if it goes 0, 1, 2, or if there's some missing, and so on. So the for each loop is, in general, how we would do it. But I've just shown that you could, if you knew exactly what was inside the hobbies array, write out the repeated line yourself. Echo this, echo this, echo this. Next question. Create an associative array with the keys name, height, and age. Assign these keys the appropriate values. So we're going to create an associative array, meaning an array whose keys are strings. So we want something that looks like this, right? And we want the keys to be name, age, and height. And we just need to fill in the values. So for name, we'll go Michael. Age will go 27. Height will go 1.81. Right. So as I said, this is an associative array. So it represents usually one single thing, me, but with different properties, different aspects of characteristics. Right. Having defined me, add a username and password entries to me. So here I've given the array some elements when I've defined it. But now, having already defined it, I need to add things to it. So I write in what I want to add to it at the particular index that I want to add it at. So having defined me, add a username and add a password. So it's going to look like that. And I need to just put the particular values I want for the username. So the username will go for MJ Burgess. Password I'll go for test. Right, so here I'm adding MJ Burgess, the value MJ Burgess, at the key username to the array me, and so on for password. Right, echo out this information. So echo out the information inside me. So I can do this again in two ways. I could say echo out name, my name, echo out my age, echo out my height. Hang on, HEIGHT. Echo out password and username and so on. That's kind of like the manual way of echoing out every single element of the array me. So we'll echo out my name, then my age, then my height, then my username, then my password. But if I don't know what every element of my array is named, if I don't know there's a name, there's an age, and a height, I don't know what those keys are, or if I don't know how many elements there are, or if I just don't want to write lots of echo statements, then I should use a loop. For each me as characteristic value, let's say, so this will say for every element in me, where the key is characteristic and the value is value, do this particular thing. Let's just echo out characteristic value for a new line at the end there as well. So this means exactly the same thing as this in this particular situation. But you know, if I decided to add keys to this later on, or come back and change something, like add a I don't know, shoe size maybe, and this would update appropriately because it's looping through every particular element, regardless of how many elements there are. But this particular method wouldn't update. I'd have to go back and echo me shoe. So let's put in some new lines here. I can just do that, and that should be fine. Let's see if we've got any echoes up here without any new lines. So all our echoes up here have new lines, so we'll get a nice formatted output. So let's just run this. PHP 3 arrays. Ooh, syntax error. Shoe. Probably because I didn't pay enough attention when I was adding it back in. So there's a comma that needs to be added out. CLS. There you go. It's all printed out. Right, so you can see the loop working there. You see, you've got the characteristic colon value, characteristic colon value. So that's key colon value, and the same. That's what's happening with this loop here. The name colon and the particular name. In this case, Michael. Right. Let's run that in the browser, perhaps, just to show you this running in a browser. Well, should we? Yeah, let's open up htdocs. Let's put in here a new file, 3.php, and let's edit that and put in this code here into this file here, file 3, which is in my htdocs folder, which is the one that Apache is serving files from. So when I go to localhost 3.php, I get the output of that file. Now, of course, this isn't going to be formatted in any particular way, because to format things for browsers, we need to use HTML and CSS. So it's just going to dump everything out onto the screen. It won't respect or display new lines, tabs, and multiple spaces. It'll only display one space. So that's why we use these HTML markup and CSS to describe our documents properly and style them properly, so the browsers can understand how to lay them out. But what we can do is view the source, the raw output, and then we do get the new lines and spaces and so on showed clearly. So that was just to show you that. Let's go back then. So continuing, now on to 4 functions. So question: write a login function which takes 2 arguments. Ooh, let's spell that right. Arguments, a username and a password. If the password is test, then echo both arguments. Otherwise, echo denied. So write a function. So here we're just defining a function, how a machine is going to work, called login, that takes 2 arguments, the username, 2 arguments or inputs, username and password. And this function is going to say, if the password is test, then just echo out both of those arguments. So echo out username, password. Let's just echo out like that. Put a new line there as well. Why not? Otherwise, so if the password isn't test, then echo denied. Denied. There we go. Right. So this little function definition defines how the machine or the process called login is going to work. It doesn't actually do anything. It just defines how that process is going to work. It takes 2 inputs, a username and a password, and when it's given those inputs, will test the password for test, echo username and password if it's given. Otherwise, it will echo denied. So let's actually run that machine or call that function. So here's login. Yes, so that would be one way of using it. So if we run the file now, I run php run 4, we get MJ Burgess and test bridged out, because what it does is it says it is test is a password test. If so, print these out. If it's not, print denied. If it wasn't test, get right. Just comment that out for now and move on to the next question. Define a function called password which randomly returns either test or guessed. So a function password, no inputs, is just going to randomly return either test or guessed. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, if you look at the conditional section, where you've got an example here where something randomly echoes either blue or green, depending on the 1 or 0 value here. So it's basically the same idea. We take a something that's either 0 or 1, right? It will randomly return either test or guessed. So if 0 or 1 is 1, just to be very clear, we can put return test, else return test. You need to have done the conditionals section and followed that through and understood how that's working. Right. So again, this is just defining a blueprint of how a machine's working, if you like. It's just a specification. It's not actually performing any operations right now. Something to note, a difference to notice about this function here, the password function and the login function as well. The password function takes no inputs and has a return value. So this is the output of the function, the result you'll get when you call it, right? It's the only way to get values out of a function is to use a return statement. Whereas this function here doesn't have a return keyword there, so there's no output, no return value output from that function. Now echo means write, okay, so it's an operation, so it will do something, but the function itself, when it's called, won't actually give you any value you could put inside a variable or anything like that. It's because there's no return keyword. So there's a couple of differences, important differences between these two function definitions here. This one has input but no output, and this one has no input but it's got some output. And this one performs the writing operation. This one doesn't really perform any writing operations at all. It won't write to the screen or anything. There's no echo statement there. Right. Good. So let's move on. Call your login function, supplying a username and password, where the password should be given by your password function. So we want to call the login function, where the password is supplied by the password function. We could write it like this. That's perfectly reasonable. Or we can just call the password function right here in the login function. So when I call so in the first example, line 32 and 33, I call password. That gives me either test or guessed back out, which I put inside a variable called password. And then I put the variable password in the input position into the login function. So I have a password and a username going into the login function. It's exactly equivalent to writing it like this. I don't need an intermediate variable. I can just put the return value, either test or guessed, directly in as input into the login function. So that's also reasonable. Now, to be honest, in practice, I would probably write line 35 rather than 32 or 33, because there's not much use in having an intermediate variable like that, which only stores the result of a function. You might as well put the function in the input position straight away, or the function call in that input position. So let's run this file. PHP 4 MJ Burgess test. So I'm getting the same output as before, because before I called the login function, obviously, and here I'm calling the login function. And it must have happened that the password was test. So when I put my username and test in, I got the username and test out. Now, to show that this is sensitive to a random value, so it could have been guessed. For example, the password could have returned the guessed function. Let's run it again, and you'll get denied sometimes. So that's obviously coming out as guessed, and that's coming out as test. Right. That was the functions section, function section 4. Let's move on then. I'll just check for no questions and make sure that I haven't gone too wrong. Can't get to them. Can't. Oh well. Maybe I should make sure that there's oh, here we go. There we go. Right, good. So there's no questions. Now, moving on to includes. So create a file. So then the includes questions. First question is create a file called title.php, which just echoes out a variable called title. So we'll create a file called title.php. Let's create that in htdocs called title.php. And it's just going to echo out the variable title. And we're not going to define a title. It's just going to write echo title. So where are we? Where it includes. Create another file called blog.php, which defines title, then includes title.php. So we want to create another file called blog.php. Save in htdocs as well, which just defines title. Let's say my blog, and includes title.php. Right, so what this is demonstrating is that inside the title.php file there, we've got an echo title command, and that's just being pasted in directly in line 6. But I have defined the title variable not inside the title.php file, but inside the blog.php file. So this can use variables defined outside of it. So look then, in blog.php, after including title.php, close the PHP section with that. Let's do that then. And write a few sentences which might go into a blog article. So my blog, this is a message which might go into a blog. Right. Now let's visit this on a browser. Let's visit this with a browser. You could run it on the command line, but I put it in htdocs. You might as well go to it in the browser. Localhost blog.php. There you go, my blog. That's the echo title coming from title.php. And that's this is a message which might go into a blog article coming from blog.php. So this little exercise is meant to demonstrate how we can have files like title.php which rely upon variables defined elsewhere. And this is a very primitive sort of templating system or mail merge kind of system where you would have a file like title.php which would say, for example, echo title, echo name, it was great to see you, echo message, thanks very much, echo regards, and all of those would be variables that would be sort of defined contextually somewhere else. Maybe they would come from an array, maybe they come from some kind of somewhere else, a function call, and then you could include this template file and just display the particular value of those variables defined outside of it. So that was the first principle. And the second one was that outside of a PHP region, this text here will just be sent back as though it were echoed. So this will just be written directly in an unaltered fashion back to the browser. So we get my blog, and we get that's from PHP, and we get this as we've written it outside the PHP section. Good. So let's move on then. Namespaces. Create a file called library.php. Inside library, define a function called display. Display should take one argument and echo it. It doesn't need to return anything. So we'll define library.php. Let's do it in here as well. I mean, I'm practicing this myself, so I'll do it here. So function, define a display function, which should take one argument. You can call it anything if you like, but let's say call it message, and it will echo it. It doesn't need to return anything. Again, here we're defining the blueprint of a particular operation called display, which takes one input echoes that input, but doesn't have any output in the sense that you can't store any of the output from display into a variable or anything because there's no return value. So it performs the echo operation, but the function itself has no output. So let's have a look. Create a file called application.php. Call application. Save that. What should this do? Inside application, define a message variable which contains a string. So message hello world. Right. Include library.php and use your display function to output the message. So we want to include library.php, which should just paste into this file the contents of library.php, which are just the display function definition. So now we can use that function to echo our message. So add a namespace declaration to the top of library.php. The namespace should be called library. So we want to go to library.php. We want to add a namespace declaration, library, to the top of that file. Now that's going to, if you recall, prefix every function definition inside this file with library. So it will effectively now be called library display rather than just display. So when we include this file, all those functions are going to have that prefix in front of them. Right. So next question. Change the function call in application.php to reflect the new namespace. So in application.php, we've included library.php, but now the function isn't called display, it's called \library\display because we put a namespace there. So just to show that, let's try and run this file. So let's run application.php. We would find that there's an error. Call to undefined function display. That's because we've just used its old name, right? It doesn't exist anymore under that name. We've put it inside a namespace, so it has this prefix in front of it. So we have to use that prefix in the file. So if we refresh now, it says hello world, as it should do. Now there's an advanced section in this exercise that says finally add a use statement to application.php so that the old function call will work. Now for all of these exercises, there is a corresponding walkthrough section which you can read and which should, if I have done it rightly, and I think I have, provide you with all the syntax you need for those particular exercises, except this particular question here on line 24. This doesn't have a corresponding walkthrough section on it because it's a bit more advanced actually, and it would actually be part of the 14 section, which I'm yet to write. But it is in the slides and it is in the cart exercises, so you could do it. And the solution to that question is to write at the top of this file, use function library display. That command there basically just lets you omit this prefix when you use the display function. And I may think, what's the point of that? And perhaps not a great deal of point, but just an extra piece of syntax that PHP has, an extra feature that PHP has. It can be kind of useful to have all of these use statements at the top of a file so you can see precisely what functions are being relied upon in the file that you're including. But I won't go into this too much, certainly not without a walkthrough on it, and I'll just leave it there. So include library has a namespace definition at the top of it, so its functions are going to have a library prefix, so we use that prefix when we call those functions. And I think I'll leave a discussion of the use statements and things until the section 14. It's a more advanced topic, and to be honest, it's not particularly frequent. No one's really using functions. No one's using that use function syntax in PHP, particularly at this moment. Right. Good. So let's move on then. Strings. Should be relatively simple, hopefully. Define a names variable, which is a string containing a comma-separated list of names. Names is a comma-separated list of names. Now, what it needs to be comma-separated is to have a comma in between it. That's all comma-separated means. Explode this string on the comma and save the result in names array. And what that means is split up the names string, which is just a string, it's not an array, it's just a string. Split that up into Michael, John, and Burgess parts. And how we do that is with the explode function. So we explode on the comma, meaning split on the comma, the string names. So that gives us now a names array 0 being Michael, a names array 1 being John, a names array 2 being Burgess. Right. Echo the first name and its length. So the first name in the names array is the 0. Echo its length is names array 0. That's the length of the first name. Right. More advanced questions now. Echo and replace the second name in the names string with capital M Michael. So we want to echo the replacement of John with Michael in names. So that will replace the second name, John, with capital M Michael in the string names. Now that's cheating a bit, actually, because the question doesn't say replace John in names. It says replace the second name. So it's using the question is asking you to use something a little bit more general rather than this specific, because we might not know that John is the second name in names. What would be the second name always? Well, names array 1 would be, always be the second name in the names array, because you've broken it apart on the comma. Names 1 will always be the second name regardless of what's typed there, you put anything there, and names array 1 will still be that thing. So this says replace this thing, John in this case, with Michael in the string names. Now echo names. What we should see here is, just put echo new line here. We should say that this has replaced John with Michael, but we should see that this isn't modified. This says Michael John Burgess still. Why? That's because the stir replace function makes a new string on the basis of an old string. So this is the old string, Michael John Burgess, and it replaces the second name with Michael in that string, and it makes a new string and returns that so that echo can output it, but it doesn't modify the original names. So this is still the same thing. Run this file. CLS. Here it's 7. Get Michael and 7, so we get that from the names. So we get Michael as the first name and 7 is the number of characters. Then we get the replacement, replacing John with capital M Michael, and we get the original Michael John Burgess. Right, good. Nearly that. Well, 8 is files. So create a message variable, which is a string, and a message. Yeah, message world. Write message to the file output.txt. Now remember, if you've read the walkthrough section, and we talked about this as well in session, that file put contents is the function you use to write to a file output.txt and a message or some data. Now, if you remember this as well, that if you don't specify a full path, like for example on Mac or something, you'd have home, MJ, output. On Windows, you'd have C, something else. That would be an absolute path or a full path. If you don't specify a full path, then it will assume you mean the current directory. So that's the same as writing dot for the current directory output.txt. So current directory output.txt. So that's where it'll put it. It'll put it in the current directory that we're running the script from. It'll put it in output.txt, and the thing it'll put in output.txt is the message. Right. Echo the contents of output.txt. So how do we echo the contents? With that function. File get contents. .txt. It's a reverse function. So file put contents is writing to a file, then file get contents is reading from that file. Right. Let's just run that, make sure it works. PHP 8. Hello world. Slightly misspelled. Slightly misspelled. Right. Here we write to it. Here we read from it. Right. Append another message to the end of output.txt. Now we didn't discuss this in the classroom, but it is in the files walkthrough, and that is if you just call the file put contents function, it will overwrite output.txt with message. So you need to specify an additional option to the file put contents function if you want it to write at the end of the file and not write over the file. So we write file put contents output.txt. We write another message to the end of the file. Let's say hello again, and we specify an option of file append. Constant that's just defined by PHP, and we pass it in as an input into the file put contents function, and that particular input will switch on the appending mode of that function, and it will write to the end of the function rather than write to the end of the file, sorry, rather than overwriting the file entirely. Right. Finally, echo the contents of output.txt again. So echo file get contents of output.txt. What we should see here is the original message along with hello again. So we'll get output, we'll get hello, and then we'll get hello again, and then so on. Right, let's run this function, run this file, sorry. Hello, hello again, hello world, hello again. So that's the first echo, and then that's the second with the thing appended to it. Right. Finally, http.php. So create a PHP file which contains the standard HTML. So let's just do that. Let's put this in htdocs. Put this in PHP. Overwrite it. So we want the standard stuff in stock type HTML, head, title, hello, head, something. Okay. The file should contain a form with an action and a method. The action should be the name of the file. The method should be post. Put a form in here then. Form method equals post. Action equals the name of the file, which is in this case just index.php. Now what? The form should contain a text input with a name attribute and a submit button. Right, so it should contain an input. That's a type text input. It should have a name. Let's just call it username. And that's that. And it should have a button of submit type. Let's just say send. Yeah. What else? In a PHP section, loop over post, echo its keys and values. So if you recall, underscore post is the form information that your script is sent when you click on the submit button. So it will have a username entry in this case. This is saying loop over post, so go over the post array, extract out at each go the key and the value. That's saying for every element in post, i.e. every form input, get the key and value value. Of course, the key will be the input's name, and the value will be the input's value that you type in when you fill out the form. So let's just echo key value. In this case, because the form only has one input, there's only going to be one entry in post. It'll just be one key and one value. That's fine. The loop will just go around once then, rather than multiple times. Submit the form and see the result. So let's go to localhost index.php. In that, the result, username MJ Burgess. When I go to the page first time around, post is empty. So when I try to loop over it, I don't get anything because I haven't sent it anything yet. And when I type something in and I press send, then I send it something, then post has something in it, so it loops over it. Now if I add another input there by way of demonstration, just a password, say, password, and I can give it a password type. This is all in the walkthrough for the form section. Then it will have two inputs that I've submitted. So when I refresh this, I'll get two inputs. Username, password test, click send, and I get username, MJ Burgess, password test. I put a new line there at the end, we get a new line. Or you can put it in a paragraph. Put it in a paragraph as well. Good. So that's a quick run through of all of the solution to all of those exercises. What will go up tonight, very soon, is all of these solutions with more annotation on them than I've given them there. So I'll fill them out a little bit more as well. You should find for every one of these practice exercises that there's more than enough information in the walkthroughs for the corresponding section to help you figure out what you're meant to be doing. Right, so I'll end the broadcast now and see if there's any questions. So let's go for